It's time for our monthly show about what I am reading this month. Welcome to Explore Your Enthusiasm, episode 227 with me, Tara Swiger. Usually I talk about what it's like to run a creative business and helping you not feel so alone when you're struggling with stuff, trying to work on your mindset, trying to keep going even when things are hard. Once a month, because of popular demand, because of votes that you guys made on Instagram, I share the list of what I'm reading. So if you like this episode or you wanted me to talk about something else on the podcast, you can come and tell me anytime over on Instagram. I'm at Tara Swiger. You can also vote on what books I read next or what books I talk about. So let's dive in to what I read this month. I'll be honest, it's much less than usual. So last month I had like over 10 books that I read. This month, not so many. Maybe because I was traveling, maybe because I was really focused on doing stuff. Like I was out of the house a lot this month. But here's what I read in September. The first book I'm going to talk about is Now Discover Your Strengths. It is a book based on the Gallup's Strength Finder quiz, but it's really this massive, huge study that's been going on for years, I think since the early 2000s. I first read this book when I was in my personality psychology class and we took the strengths test. It's not really a personality test. It's like, what are your strengths? So you could have any kind of personality, but have the same strengths. There are 34 strengths. They're just really, they say it doesn't mean that everybody who has them acts the same way at all. It's more like these are things that come easily to you. Or as they say, a strength is something that you do almost perfectly every time. So the company I work with, doTERRA, is made a lot of information about strengths available on their website. They've done a video of how you can use your strengths in your business for every single strength. And they created this really cool workbook, which helps you figure out how to apply your strengths to your business. And so because of that, I was looking at my strengths because my mentor had actually bought the test for me. It's like $20. I bought it for several of my teammates so they can take their figure out what their strengths are, so we work better together, because sometimes it's really hard to understand why the person that you're working with just behaves a certain way or sees the world in a certain way, and their strengths can help you not only understand their perspective, but also help them see ways that they could build a business based on their strengths. So one of the things that somebody said in this business training I was in is that if your business isn't bringing you joy every day, you're not building a business on your strengths. And I was like, whoa, that is true. So we've talked before about the 4 tendencies, and you can go back and listen to the episodes about that. Just search my podcast for 4 tendencies or my site, taraswiger.com, for 4 tendencies. I've talked all about that. That's how you react to inner and outer expectations. But the strength thing is after you know if, say, you need a lot of accountability or you need a lot of information and not accountability, how are you going to do best? So the Discover Your Strengths book, I was actually at a used bookstore, saw it for $4, and I was like, well, I should just go on and grab it. So it talks about what strengths are, how they're built, and how, and it shares all the results that they've done over studying, I think it's over 300,000 people when the book was read, and their strengths. And people are 6 times happier in their job if their job uses at least one strength. They're 3 times less likely to quit or burn out if their job uses one strength. And I've kind of avoided this book because the Now Discover Your Strengths book is really based on management and operating in a corporate world. And I was like, I'm a solo entrepreneur. It doesn't matter to me. But now that I'm working with a lot more women in my doTERRA business, mentoring them and guiding them and helping them build businesses based on their strengths, I wanted to read How Do You Deal with Other People and Their Strengths? So that is one of the books I've read that I've really enjoyed, and I recommend you at least taking the Strengths Finder test. And then if you are interested, you can go to, even if you're not using doTERRA at all, you can go to doTERRA, Our Advocates, and then Empowered You. And there's a workbook about using your strengths in your business. It would apply to any business. So go grab that if you want to, and apply your strengths to your business. So I'm having a really good time seeing my strengths, how they come out in my life, seeing how I've already applied them to my business. So one of my strengths is I'm spacing on what it's called, futuristic, which means I help paint pictures of the future and inspire people to see what's possible in the future. And I was like, that's my podcast, baby. Also, strategic is another one where I see patterns where other people just see complexity and then I can explain it to people. That's for sure what I do here a lot. That's what I do in my classes, like Pay Yourself and Elevate Your Business. And in my book, Map Your Business, I help people break down the complexity of a goal into doable steps. So I was like seeing the ways that it's already, in all of the bits of my business I love best, already using my strengths. So the question is, how can I use them across the board in all areas of my business? So that's called Now Discover Your Strengths. You should check it out. And remember that all of these books are linked up in my podcast episode, which you're going to find at tarswiger.com/podcast 227. So next up on the list, two books that I talked about in my other podcast. I don't know if you guys know, I talk about books every week with my friend Jolie of Jolie Creates. It's over at the Take Care of Yourself podcast with Tara and Jolie. You can find it at takecareofyourselfpod.com, or you can follow us on Instagram. We're at TakeCarePod. But the book that we read together this month was the book Recovery by Russell Brand. Not because either of us is in drug recovery, but because several people that I follow online were reading it and like mentioning how useful it was in thinking about things like eating sugar or using social media to kind of numb out of your life. So we talk a lot about that book over on the podcast, how that it applies to so many of the things that you do to numb out of your life. And in my experience, if you are not feeling great and you're numbing out instead of exploring it, it's going to be harder for you to get anything done in your business. It's going to be harder for you to get anything done in the thing you care most about, or to work on your own projects if you're constantly in that state of avoidance instead of accepting and moving through. So that's Recovery by Russell Brand. The second book, so Recovery we read together, and then one week I talked about Simplicity Parenting by Kim John Payne. As I talked about in last month's reading roundup, I have been reading all the parenting books. Simplicity Parenting, the subtitle is something like The Power of Less to Raise Happier, More Resilient Kids. I found it really helpful in thinking about how to deal with kids who are maybe coming from unstable backgrounds, which would be the case in my parenting journey. And Simplicity Parenting, it talks a little bit about minimalism, but mostly in order to reduce stress on your kid from having to choose between one of 100 toys is stressful for some kids. Choosing between one of 5 is a lot easier. That's just one section of it. Another section he talks about that I really liked was rhythm, creating a rhythm of like every Tuesday we do this, every morning we do this. That kind of structure, and all the books for kids who come from hard situations talks about creating a loving, gentle structure, which Kim John Payne calls rhythm, can build trust with your kids. So, with your kids, if you've been raising them since birth, you've built trust by showing up every day, by feeding them every time they were hungry, by reflecting their little smiles back to them and laughing with them. That all builds like the neurological ability to trust in their brain. And for the kids that are coming to me brand new, no matter what their age is, I need to build that trust with them. And if they're over the age of a newborn, you are working with wiring that maybe never built trust with anybody, or they've just been pulled away from the person that they had built trust with. So, although feeding them and putting them to bed and keeping them closed builds trust, you can also build more trust by having a rhythm to your day, and so they know what to expect, and talking to them if they're old enough about what to expect can all help build that trust and that sense of comfort and ease in the home. Because I don't know if you can imagine if you were 2 or 3 or 5 and you went to a stranger's house and then just suddenly you had to live there and live by their rules and things were different every day because the person's self-employed, it's kind of stressful. So it's kind of stressful for me to live it every day when I don't have a rhythm of what I do when and what I do on what days. So we talk way more about that. I talk about all of the kind of principles in that book. There are 4 main principles, and I've just covered 2 here. You can listen to all 4 of them on the Take Care of Yourself podcast with Tara and Jolie. If you're not listening to that podcast, I recommend it. I love it. Like, I think it's super fun. We have a Facebook group where we stream live every week, a couple days before the show comes out, and we ask for your feedback. We read books that you've suggested. This month, our read-along book is Body Positive Power. So you can go check that out at takecareofyourselfpod.com. Next up, I have to share a book that Jolie recommended and I finally read. It's so freaking good. It's a novel called The Power by Naomi Alderman. And oh my gosh, like, it went places I did not expect for it to go. So short version of what happens in the first chapter is girls, first 15-year-olds, and then soon everybody wakes up this power they have to have like electricity in their hands. So you can like stun somebody, you can electrocute somebody, but basically you have physical power that you can use on anybody. And the way that it goes, and then the last 2 chapters, how they bring it back around. I don't want to spoil anything, but it is just like totally that little mind blown emoji. Like, that was me when I finished it. It was crazy. So it's called The Power by Naomi Alderman. If you liked Margaret Atwood's work, like The Handmaid's Tale, I really recommend The Power. If you have a teen girl, totally let her read it. If she's over 15, 16, I mean, it's up to you. But it's not like a 10-year-old girl book. It's like a teenage girl book. So the last book I want to talk about is a book that I think you all should read. It's by Ijoma Oluo, and it's called So You Want to Talk About Race. You need to read this book if you live in 2018. If you're listening to this in the future, you probably also still need to read this book. So whether you want to talk about race or not, you need to read it, especially if you are, I'm going to give you some examples. So if you hear the term white privilege or male privilege and you're like, I don't understand what that means. And if you think, well, I'm not a racist, and like, I don't have to worry about racism because I absolutely don't hate people. She makes this really great distinction in the very beginning of the book. Then when we're talking about racism and doing anti-racist work, what we're talking about is not the personal feelings of any one individual. There's going to be people with a whole variety of feelings about a whole variety of topics. That's not what the work's about. The work's about the system of unfairness, injustice. And that unfairness and injustice shows up in the educational system, in the judicial system, in economical systems, in corporations, in your own community. That injustice and inequality shows up everywhere. And that systematic inequality is what we're talking about when we talk about racism. And anti-racist work is to change the systems. So no matter what you feel in your heart, and you guys are all like love bugs and wonderful people who I don't think harbor hate in your heart. If you want to live in a world that's more just, if you want your children to grow up in a world and to live in a world where we don't have these unequal and unjust systems, then read this book, because it's going to talk to you about how to have the conversations, how to make changes. Even if you're like, Tara, I've got 4 kids and I run a business and I'm exhausted, I'm not going to go out and do activist work. Reading this book will help you see how the systems are unequal and also help you understand when people are talking about it and when they're maybe talking about it from an angle that's just reinforcing the systematic oppression. So if you don't understand white privilege, definitely read this book. She has a great explanation about why looking at your privilege is so helpful. If you don't even understand what that phrase means, she explains a lot of it. A lot of things that you might have seen somebody shouting about on Facebook or Instagram, this book explains it. If you've had uncomfortable conversations about race, or you've had realizations that some system you're a part of is unequal or not accessible to everybody, definitely read this book. The thing is, this book is written for people of all races. So it doesn't matter where you're coming from, if you have personal experience with it or you don't have personal experience with it, the book is written for everybody and how to talk about it. It's just great. And if you want to know what you can do to change the injustices, like this is a book that I've done a lot of reading the past couple months on this topic, both online articles and some books that I've shared here with you. Things from fiction, like The Hate You Give, which is an amazing novel. The movie's coming out. I heartily recommend you read the novel. Everything from The Hate You Give to the Black Lives Matter memoir to this one, So You Want to Talk About Race, which I feel like is a really great starting place. I kind of wish I had read this in the beginning because it has chapters on all these topics that have just been a learning process for me, and I know for many of you, because you've reached out to me and you said you're reading it too, or you're reading books like it because you're trying to learn more about creating a world that's more just for everybody. So that's So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Oluo, and I will link all of it up on my podcast page. You'll find it at tarasviger.com/podcast227. Also, if you're listening in your podcast app or on YouTube, you can probably scroll down and find the links. We try to share the links in all the places. So you can click through and get these books. On my podcast, I link to the Amazon link. I earn a couple cents from every book you buy through those links, but I get a lot of the books from my library. So go to your library and look them up at your library. I'm a big fan of that. If you have questions about anything or you want to suggest books that I read, tell me, because as you can see, I didn't read as much this. I actually have a huge stack of library books. I don't know if you can see it in my background. You see this stack? And then my laptop's actually sitting on a whole stack of books that are all to my to-be-read pile. But I always love adding books to my stack, so please come share them with me over on Instagram. You can use the hashtag #ExploreYourEnthusiasm and tag me, Tara Swiger. The thing is, when the podcast comes out, a lot of you tag me, and so I miss them that way. But if you share them with the hashtag, I can go and see them all on one page, and I won't miss any. So hashtag Explore Your Enthusiasm. Tag me. I'm Tara Swiger. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you have like a reading-filled October.